Yeah, I guess it's both and it's neither. In a sense, Confucianism predates both modern ideas of religion and philosophy. A more interesting question is maybe why do some people want to say that it is philosophy or it is religion, and what are they trying to do when they do that? And what you see often in the modern period is often people who call or limit Confucianism to saying it's only a philosophy, they're often trying to divorce it from social action and from community action. And there's a long history over the last 100, 150 years of people defining Confucianism as a philosophy in connection with more authoritarian or right-wing political employments of the tradition. Confucianism began in Japan about the same time Japanese states began, which is in the middle of the first millennium of the Common Era. And what's unique and interesting about the development of Confucianism in Japan is that even though from that point onwards Confucianism affected all kinds of very central aspects of Japanese society, education, politics and so on, Confucianism never really became the mainstream or never really became a mainstream popular discourse until really quite late, until about 1600. And that means that Confucianism in Japanese history, as opposed to Chinese history and other places in East Asia, is very much an early modern phenomenon. It's something that's very closely related to the nature of early modern society, you know, mass urbanization, literacy, increase in literacy, bigger disposable incomes, all these sort of things. It's very much in Japanese history an early modern and to a lesser extent modern phenomenon. Well, a lot of theories that people talk about in relation to Confucianism relate to its capacity to work as a new form of international relations, for instance. But most people never look at Confucianism outside of China. Japan's the one case we have of a country which for a long time is independent of China. You know, Confucianism in Japan was never pushed by any kind of Chinese political dominance or military dominance, anything like that. So you have, it's really the only example actually of a country outside China that has a long tradition of Confucianism without having any sort of political pressure put upon it by China. So that allows us to see all sorts of things about how Confucianism works in a sort of, well, it's not culturally neutral because it's Japan, but a non-Chinese cultural context. It shows a lot of interesting things. For instance, I mean, many of the points where Confucianism was most popular or most politically central in Japan were periods where Japan was in a very aggressive, sometimes at war with China. So that provides a really different image of what a lot of people think, especially when they, you know, sometimes people just equate Confucianism with Chinese culture. Well, this book shows Confucianism being used in, you know, the brutal military occupation of China in the mid-20th century, for instance, or sort of to justify invading northern China, things like this. So it problematizes and makes maybe more complex the more global history of Confucianism. Well, on the one hand, Confucianism has been an influence on really basic things in Japanese society for, you know, over 1,000 years. So things like the nature of Japanese literacy, the way people bury their dead, the basic words used in political culture, the words we use today in Japanese to say a minister of state or the prime minister, all these things contain Confucian vocabulary, have Confucian influence within them. So in this sense, just a lot of basic day-to-day things that people take for granted. If you look beneath the surface, there's Confucian influence under there, or they're articulating Confucian terms. But on the other hand, in a sense, you could say actually Japan since 1945 is a Confucianism-free zone in the sense that people don't identify with Confucianism. If you say the word to them, they don't have a particularly positive image about it. It's not something that anybody would think is relevant at all to Japan today. So these are sort of two contradictory elements which I think make the place of Confucianism in Japan today very interesting, and as what I call in one of the chapters of the book, Confucianism as taboo, or a sort of a post-1945, post-war position for Confucianism in Japanese society as a taboo. And that's also related to the ongoing problem ever since the war, and actually particularly at the moment, the problem Japan has dealing with its East Asian neighbours and its own East Asian inflected history. Well, it depends if people are interested in Confucianism globally or in terms of East Asian culture, or also if they're interested in the rise of China and the sort of cultural and ideological arguments that go with that. This book is a great chance to complicate a lot of the stories that attach to this term Chinese culture, to take that apart, to think about how different cultures, I mean, in East Asia and other parts of the world, of course, are made up. You know, every culture is a multicultural society in a way, right? Every society is multicultural. How do different traditions that might primarily be associated with China or primarily associated with Japan, how do they interact in the reality, the historical reality and the contemporary reality of these two very, very large, very, very powerful countries to begin with, and in the rest of the region around them?